Hi, and welcome to Love Sober Podcast, the podcast for the sober and sober curious. I'm Kate Bailey. I'm a coach, an author, and I'm a Brit mum from West Sussex. Hi, and welcome back. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the podcast Tawny Lara. And Tawny is an author. She has many incarnations. She's a podcaster. She has a book which we're going to dive into today, and also an alcohol-free drinks brand. So we're going to kind of dive into all of those a bit later on. But I just wanted to say a big warm welcome to you, Tawny. It's so lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here I know we've followed each other's work for years now, so it's nice it feels like we're meeting IRL even though it's it's on Zoom.
Yeah, it really does. And I don't know, because I know you've got a podcast as well, and I just feel like it's one of those beautiful byproducts, isn't it, of getting to actually chat to other people. Like, it's a way of building community.
100%. Yeah, that community that's it. Cause we'll get into my story, but like I didn't go through the traditional AA route of getting sober. My community really is like the online sober community. That's like, we've all helped each other,
Yeah. Yes, and same here. 100%. Yeah, it was the online community and that really kind of helped me find my place. And that's what a beautiful, because people talk about tech, don't they? We've got enough to say about it, in the negative sense, but actually for certain niches, and people struggling with it is basically, you can find the others, right? You can find the others.
100%. Like, I think that's the most important thing is, with anything, but especially with mental health, finding out that you're not alone in your struggle is just, I think, life-changing,
Yeah.
and if, back in the day, you used to need to go to a church basement to find your people, and that required a lot, like to drive to the place and go in and be this new person and not know anyone. Whereas now you could get on sober Instagram, you could listen to a podcast, you could go to a virtual meeting and just have your camera off, like I think mental health support's a lot more accessible now. And yes, there's a lot we could say that's bad about the internet, but that's a really good thing about the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to dive in, right? And I just love the title of your book. It's so cheeky. So Tawny has written a book called About Sober Sex and Sober Dating, Sober Hooking Up, relationships, and it's called Dry Humping. I love it. It's just brilliant. It's what it says on the tin. It's like someone had to do it. You did it. It's amazing. So we want to dive into that. And we were just sort of talking just before I hit record about, this being the kind of elephant in the room, right? I don't know what it's like in the States, but for us Brits, it's the kind of thing that you don't talk about. And we kind of do, but I don't think we've gone there on many podcasts. So I'm really excited to dive into this. And thank you for being brave enough to write a book about it. So could you just tell us, for the listeners that don't know you and don't know your work, a bit of a backstory, how you came to be in the sober space and why this book?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me and for the work that you do in the sober space. It's so great. I, I come from a bartender party girl background. Think of your stereotypical millennial party girl who's like chugging Jack Daniels from the bottle, taking shots, playing flip cup, dancing on bars. That was me, and I was either bartending, working behind the bar, or on the other side of the bar, drinking or dancing on the bar. So my whole life, my whole adult life was really just surrounded by alcohol. And I now I can look back on how I intentionally surrounded my life with alcohol because it was easier to be around people who drink, then because as soon as I was around people who didn't drink, then or if I drank around people who didn't drink to the point of blacking out, then that would really show that I had a problem. So I stayed in that bartending space for a long time. From age 18 to 28, for 10 years, I bartended, and I lived a really reckless life of binge drinking until I blacked out, um, hooking up with people who did not respect me or care about me because I did not respect me or care about me. And also say a lot of, friendships were formed because of alcohol. When I quit drinking, I learned the difference between my drinking buddies and my real friends. Um, and, I really, yes, my book is about sex and dating and romantic relationships, but I think the book, a lot of the advice and the personal stories that I share are really just applicable to relationships, relationships with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers. There's there's a big in that, the Venn diagram of the role that like alcohol plays in relationships. It's like it's that liquid courage center of people relying on liquid courage to make themselves feel more confident, to have uncomfortable conversations, to maybe become somebody else for a couple hours. So it's like I like to add that caveat that yes, I predominantly write and speak about romantic and sexual relationships, but I think this work applies to all relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, hearing you loud and clear on that. When you talk about that, my brain's going to boundaries. It's going to the
Yeah.
inconvenient. It's that brave piece as well. The kind of the shyness that we can feel that we're almost supposed to never feel, but actually we feel it for a reason. And this is such an important topic. I think, the kind of sex side of it, maybe we could kind of talk about that first, maybe,
Sure.
and work through the different areas, because one thing that I feel very, yeah, sort of passionate about, because I'm a mum now and I have a daughter. I have a son and a daughter. And I think about myself and my teenage years, and it went hand in hand. It went hand in hand,
Mm-hmm.
becoming sexually active and drinking, and they were coupled until I got sober. So
Yeah.
and that is the story for so many people, so many women, so many people, so many women, that it's so integral and yet can be so destructive and so numb and all the rest of it is kind of freaking terrifying. So I wonder if we want to kind of get that one out of the way first.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you're 100% not alone, and I know I'm not alone. And based on, the research I did for the book, I interviewed so many people because like I said, when we find community, it really helps break that stigma to know that we're not alone when we're struggling with sex, with pleasure, with there's so much to unpack. Sex is a taboo topic, and sobriety and mental health are taboo topics. So when you put them together, it's like there's so much stigma, there's just so much. And a lot of us have a lot of there's a I hate to start with this, but I guess I am. There is a chapter about sexual assault and PTSD. Because I was like, I can't write a book about sober sex being better without acknowledging the fact that the bedroom is a source of trauma for a lot of people, especially women, especially queer people. So, and whether that's sexual assault, maybe a lot of people are unpacking religious trauma they were told that, growing up that masturbation and sex or being queer is wrong. So when they get sober, they have to unpack all of that and figure out who they are as sexual beings again, so it's like sorry to start on such a heavy note, but I think it's important.
Like, why don't we dive in? Like, we're doing it, aren't we? Well, because I'm sort of what I'm hearing is, and I hear that, you know, that piece about the trauma is really, really big. And again, like you said, these things were taboo. Thank goodness we're sort of talking a bit more about it nowadays, and there seems to be more support for it. Within that, what I'm hearing is almost that for everyone, it's like we actually have to learn from scratch, all of us, right?
You're so right. We are 100% starting from scratch. And again, when you get sober or even just reevaluate your relationship with alcohol, you cut back on drinking, that's its own starting from scratch. You know, you're figuring out, who am I without alcohol? Where do I fit into the world? Am I even working the right job? Do my friends have my best interest at heart? A lot comes up. So again, you already have a lot that you're going through, and then it's like, God, now I have to like date. Now I like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like it's a lot, you know. But it's, you know, the book is structured in three parts. The first part is about being single, dating yourself, getting to know who you are as a sexual person without alcohol. Dating, sober date ideas. And then the middle part is more about sex. It's about pleasure. It's about, you know, what to do if you feel triggered, what to do if, you know, how to quote unquote come out and say, this is the first time I've had sex sober. I really need to take it slow. And then the last third of the book is about being in a relationship. It is about, there's a chapter about how to fight in a healthy way.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a chapter about breakups, because I also was like, I can't write a book about sober dating and relationships without acknowledging that sober heartache is one of the hardest, most painful feelings to go through.
Yeah. This piece about kind of relating intimately, and when I hear, I mean, look, I've been married for how many? I always say to my husband, how long have we been married for? And he goes, oh, I don't know, too bloody long.
Yeah.
So it's like a lifetime, right, to me. And I'm like, oh, you. But where are we? I'm like 54 now. And we met.
You're 54.
Yeah, that's the right response.
You're 54. I don't believe that. You're my hero. Holy shit.
So we're, along with the podcast, we'll actually have to do like we have to do visual.
Yeah, I'm blown away right now. That's cool. Let's just talk about how hot you are for the rest of the podcast.
Okay, so for the rest of the podcast, we're going to talk about how hot I am. But yeah, so I mean, it's like 25 years or whatever we've been together, so I have a particular lens on it, but I know that through getting to know people on the, you know, sober sphere, on sober communities from the last 11 years, I've been on those. This idea of, you know, dating and breaking up has come up, and there is genuine kind of like, what the actual fuck am I supposed to do with all of this, especially with the online, with the what should I put on my profile? What am I supposed to looking out for?
Yeah.
What do I do on a first date? How do I tell people? And there is so many layers to this. So you know, I wonder what I love about your book is it's really practical, right? So it's deep, and there is that stuff, you know, there is the stuff about boundaries, which we need to know. There is there's some of that, the kind of psychological elements and emotional intelligence, but it's also, we almost like need a guide as well, just to someone to go, it's overwhelming, just do A, B, and C, see how that goes, right? And so I wonder if you could, and I think your book does that. I think it's brilliant for that.
Thank you.
So I wondered, like, can you just, for people who haven't read it and who are thinking about buying it, what tips would you give to people setting out and going for these first sober dates, from putting yourself on a forum and your first date? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the most popular questions that I get, which is why it has its own chapter in the book. I talk about my own experience with sober dating. I interview a lot of people as well. So, and I that chapter is also split into threes, where I talk about basically how to set up your dating profile. And it's like a couple different ways to approach it. You can put sober on, like, just very upfront. I'm sober curious. I'm doing a dry month. Whatever feels right for you. You could be just super transparent about it. That's what I preferred. That there's also, you could wait until you get to the DMing stage. Maybe you form some sort of connection after messaging or FaceTiming or talking on the phone. Then you can let them know. And some people prefer to wait until they meet in person. They have a couple dates before they open up about something so personal. And I think it's really important to remember that being sober or sober curious is very personal. Like, you don't owe anyone a long explanation. And I also want to acknowledge the difference between, quote unquote, coming out as sober curious or doing a dry month versus being in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. There is a lot of overlap, but those conversations look very different. If you like, I had to give up alcohol because I was self-destructive. I was drinking until I blacked out, while some people can give up alcohol because they're just like, yeah, I just don't like how I feel, so it's like everyone's reason is very personal. It's very different. And the people that I have found in my research, people who are in long-term recovery prefer to wait until they've connected with someone before really sharing that part of themselves. Or even just saying, like, I don't drink up front, but then waiting until you've formed some sort of connection to really go into why. Because again, most people don't need to know your why. And I think that's a super important thing to remember when you are sober dating.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? It's I like what you said about, not everyone, people don't need to know your story. They don't deserve your story. And I always remember us talking about it, but it was in terms of friendship. It was almost like a red, amber, green system. It's like, who are my green people? My green people are those people
Yeah.
who they've got my back, and they're the people I tell my stuff to. And that doesn't happen immediately. Generally, it takes a while. So with dating, that's no different, right? It's going to be, there are stages, and some people, just like when we go out and we socialize, and like, some people just get the antibiotics story in the early
Yeah.
days, right? Some people get that, actually, we're gonna go there, we're gonna have this. And that for me is like about containment, and boundaries. And the hard thing I think about that is that when I stopped drinking, I had neither containment nor boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So having to use that sense of discernment, this is why I think your book's important, because actually we do need a bit of a guide, right? Because actually we can be like rabbits in headlights about it.
Yeah, and I mean that's why, so much of the book is really tangible, actionable advice, like sample conversations, do's
Yeah.
and don'ts. Try this, don't do that. you know?
Yeah.
Um, like, because I need, this is truly the book I needed. I
Yeah.
needed someone to spell it out for me. Like, if you're, there's a chapter about if you're in a relationship with someone who drinks alcohol, how to set boundaries in there, how to start those really uncomfortable conversations of, like, if you don't feel comfortable having alcohol in your home,
Mm.
how do you tell your husband that when alcohol has been in your home for 10 years and now
Yeah.
all of a sudden you don't feel comfortable? So, and again, it's like, I'm not a mental health professional, so I interviewed many mental health professionals and I quote them throughout the book because I wrote a lot of the actionable advice comes from collaborating with mental health professionals because they're trained on how to have these conversations, So I'm really like translating, putting it into maybe some more colloquial
Yeah.
terms. So people, like, you really can like flip to this page and be like,
Mm.
there's 3 different ways to start this conversation, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I can really relate to that. And I remember, well, have going back to my relationship, and so my husband and I had been together, so 11 years. I'm now going to spend
Who
the whole podcast
knows?
doing the maths. Yeah. So like, but anyway,
Nobody really knows.
but we had been drinking buddies, right? We had met in our 20s. We were musicians. We met and we were in a band. And it was just part of the fabric, and it was brilliant. Like there were things that were brilliant, there were things that were terrible that then got more and more messy for me, in that gray area drinking way, where there was nothing going on externally, but for me internally, the cracks were starting to appear for me in my mental health. And by the point that, and this is so common, I think I see it so much in sort of our sober communities and with clients, it's like that point where you're going, okay, this doesn't work. But by that point, alcohol has become very central to lots of different things, and you can't separate it out. So it feels like this essential part. And the fear that comes from people, it's mainly relationships, isn't it? That's what people fear. They fear not being able to connect. They fear changing. And I feel like this is, that this part of, changing and saying to your partner, it's almost like, you changed a rule book on me.
Yes, that's
That
a
can
really
feel
good way to
so,
put it. It's because it's been this way for so long. And when you're in a long-term relationship, it's like yes, of course you get sober for yourself, like you have to, but it's you also need to acknowledge like, look, I've been in this relationship and alcohol was a big part of our
yeah,
relationship. We're going to get through it, but it's going to be bumpy for a little bit and it's
yeah,
okay. But it's tough.
yeah. And I think those stories of hope are very important for people, and that reassurance. I almost see that bit of, when people are getting sober, obviously you've got the habit change, you've got the kind of early muscle power, you've got all of this. So when I work with people I work with women as a coach. And then a lot of this is almost like, okay, like because it's transitional, holding, containing, and reassuring. So you can take one step and then take another step and
Yeah.
take another step, because it's freaking terrifying. So, I mean, that was for me. I remember I said to my husband, I didn't tell him for about a month because he was
Mm.
so used to me saying, I'm never drinking again every Sunday morning. And then because I was on online forums, this was before Instagram even existed, right? Like imagine that, no Instagram, right? It was just this blogging site, Soberistas. And I
Mm.
was hanging out on there and had met people and was like, okay. And I thought I better tell him because he might think I'm having an affair because I'm like always on my phone. So I was like, look, by the way, I haven't been drinking. And I told him about 3 weeks into it. I said, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've not been drinking. I'm not drinking. I'm doing this. And he was like, oh, okay. Right. This is not empty. It's like you are doing this. So I found that quite useful. It's like, and and we made an agreement about not having wine in the house because that was my trigger drink.
Hmm.
Um, and figured it out. So that's kind of what I did. But what other tips have you got for people in that position?
Well, I'm so glad that it sounds like your husband was incredibly supportive. I'm sure there was some difficulty, but it's like, you guys figured it out.
Yeah.
Um, some, I would argue most relationships actually don't make it the if the if the spouse has a problematic relationship with alcohol, the other person getting sober can bring up a lot of uncomfortable emotions in the partner who still drinks, but again, you're a unit, so it's a lot of couples, it can get messy.
Mm.
um And ultimately it really is, you have to take a stand for yourself. You cannot decide if someone else has a drinking problem. You cannot diagnose someone. All you can do is decide if someone else's drinking makes you feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
if it makes you feel triggered, if it makes you think maybe I can have just one. Um, if it's bringing up some of that in you, it sounds like it may not be a safe space for you right now. And and girl, I get that is like so much easier said than done, especially if there's kids involved. It is hard. Um, so ultimately, in the book, there's a whole section on that where if you are dating someone who is a problem drinker,
Yeah.
it's how to take care of yourself. It's how to set boundaries. It's and advocating for your kids, like it's really complex and complicated. And if they decide that they want to quit drinking for themselves down the road, maybe there can be some reconciliation. But for you and your recovery, you have to take care of yourself. Because if you stay with someone and you just hope that they quit drinking and you hope that you're a good example, resentments are going to form, and it usually doesn't turn out too well. And I know that that's not like a super positive spin, but it's like, this is realistic. This is,
Yeah.
earlier I said I learned who my drinking buddies are versus my real friends. It's the same thing. A lot of my sexual and romantic relationships, the only thing that we had was alcohol, and it was a rude awakening to realize that.
I feel like we absolutely can't tell the other person to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
So we can only do ourselves, right? We can only work on ourselves. And so for me, it was very much like, this is mine. I didn't want my husband to stop drinking for me at all. It was almost like it was almost too apologetic. It's like, you don't have to change, you don't have to do anything. It's just me. So I think we can also flip to that, like fawning around, like, you don't have to change anything. But what I noticed with that, I think it's almost like when you were talking about in the book, I'm going back slightly to the dating bit, when someone is supportive, or one of the favorite responses is actually when you do tell someone and they're quite neutral. It's
Yes.
great, because actually then you realize it's actually not a biggie, and there's room in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's room for you to do you, me to do me, and actually we can work this out. So sometimes that space and that neutrality, if you can have that, I feel like that's a really lovely kind of curious space to have with you both. I feel like that
Yeah.
is almost like a litmus test of that's okay. We can bet on that one. If that was a horse, I might bet on that one.
Yeah, because it's, another question I get a lot is like, how can I be supportive of my loved one, my friend, my family, my wife who's so getting sober or drinking less? And I always say, like, ask them what they need. What do they need from you? They probably don't need much from you other than picking certain restaurants or avoiding certain restaurants, suggesting date nights that are not centered around alcohol, stuff like, we will tell you what we need. And so that I put that my favorite response to quote unquote coming out as sober as neutral, because I there yes, being sober is a big part of who I am, but it's also like just one part of who I
Yeah.
am. Because if you go on a date with someone and they find out you're sober and then like they have their own shit, then it turns into a therapy session, and it's just like, it's not why I'm here. Like
This is not fun.
this is not sexy. I am not your social worker. Like so
Yeah.
when I was on dates and people were like, okay, cool. Like, are you cool going to a restaurant where there's alcohol? I'm like, yeah. Like, okay. Like that.
Yeah.
I genuinely liked that. Um, but it can just, it can be really confronting to meet a sober person if you are struggling with alcohol. So, which is why some people I went through a phase where I did not put sober on my dating app for a couple months because I was so sick of getting DMs about sobriety. I was like, no, I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah. 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 It's a really good guide, and what is underneath is it's going to be a little bit trial and error, right? And this kind of goes back to me to that bit about the confidence, the liquid courage, as opposed to the the courage and the confidence that comes by us kind of taking this out on the road. And I wonder if you can speak to that piece. How do we build our genuine confidence and our courage without the
Yes.
liquid, right?
Yeah, that's essentially the thesis of my book is how to is replacing liquid courage with intrinsic courage. And for that came organically because, like I said, I realized that interpersonal relationships was the big reason why I drank and used drugs and slept around and did a lot of I was very self-destructive, not to knock anyone who sleeps around. I think sex positivity is amazing, obviously. But for me, it was a form of self-destruction.
Mm.
Um, but I just lost my train of thought. What was the question? I was like on a time.
Yeah, it was about the genuine
Liquid courage and
confidence.
intrinsic
Yeah,
courage. Yeah.
intrinsic courage.
So for me, when I got sober, I spent a lot of time what I call dating myself. And that's actually the first chapter of the book. Um, because, I'm not the first self-help author or relationship person to be like, if you don't love yourself, no one's going to love you. And you're not like, no, everyone has said that. Everyone's heard that. But what I really hone in on is if you don't love yourself without liquid courage, then you're going to keep trying to fill this void with other things, other people, other substances, other behaviors. So for me, when I quit drinking, I filled my calendar with hobbies, with activities. I did a lot of yoga. I did yoga teacher training. I took writing courses. I studied Spanish. And I did those things that I always said I was going to do one day, you know? And that journey, like I spent a couple years really doing that. Like I dated here and there, but I really dated myself for a good couple years. And that is where I developed what I call intrinsic courage, because I learned that feeling smart makes me feel more confident. Like the more, like the better I became at writing, the better I became at Spanish. Like all the better, like the deeper I could take my yoga practice, I felt more confident. And that helped me show up more confidently on dates when I caught up with friends, hanging out with my family. That's the confidence that really, really still carries me today. And, I will also say that giving up alcohol or drinking less in a super boozy world is one of the most confident, badass things that you could do. So I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for that. We think like, who's going to want to go on a date with me? I don't drink. And it's like, flip that around. Like, I don't drink. I have standards now. Like, who gets to go on a date with me? Like that's the confidence, like you're not drinking for a reason, whether it's usually something mental health related, right? That you take a step back and reevaluate. So like that, I think that's the confidence that you take on a date with you.
Yeah. I love what you said about that. And it's making me laugh there, because it's like you said you didn't get sober with AA, but that 2-year almost grace period is quite AA, isn't it? They reckon that you
very
shouldn't
much.
and you can see why some of the stuff, even though I'm not in the fellowship and it's not my language that I use at all, I can see some wisdoms there, in those grace periods.
Definitely. There's a lot of, AA isms that I use in my book, and just that, like, one day at a time. I think that's the best advice ever. I think everybody needs that, like, needs that hanging up in their office or in their apartment, because it's like, that's all we have is one
Yeah.
day at a time. And I didn't work the 12 steps, but I think even just reading through what the 12 steps are, God, that can really be those could be wonderful writing prompts, things to talk about in therapy. I'm not anti-AA. It wasn't for me. But it has helped, and it continues to help millions of people, and it's free. So,
Yeah.
like I think it's wonderful. And I'm just glad there's so many other options now.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I was thinking about the next sort of layer of this then, in terms of we're dating ourselves, so we're going on, spending time with ourselves to get to know ourselves, to form that relationship, that solid foundation with ourselves, day in, day out, showing up, the confidence is building. I know this to be true. And if you are thinking about, stopping drinking, or you're like, your early days, it's like this happens, you have an upward spiral, it is inevitable, you have that upward spiral, right? So then that's fine, we're all like, we're in our bubble and we're doing pretty well. And then there what's the sex piece.
Well, then once you do all that stuff, then everything else is perfect, right?
Yeah.
It just all falls into place.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's kind of like how we talked about you have to figure out who you are without alcohol first. And then for me, I got creative. I leaned into some of my hobbies and made some wonderful friendships that are not alcohol based. And then when it came time to explore sex and sexuality and pleasure, I really started from square one. Like I started like hand holding was very intimidating to me. Hand holding, eye contact. I remember the first guy that I dated sober, I was very clear with him. I was just like, look, I've never really dated or hooked up sober before, so I need to go really slow. And at one point I told him, I was like, hey, holding hands like really freaks me out. I don't know that I'm ready for that. And so he was like so patient with me. Yeah, I mean, it was truly training wheels. Like I had lots of training wheels on. And again, spending that time alone helped me figure out what I need, as opposed to always dating someone because I didn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
I was able to really advocate for myself and set boundaries and communicate. Like, when it was time that we actually have sex, I was like, he knew it was my first time sober. So we took it very slow. We took breaks when I needed to take breaks. And it was, I'm so grateful that my first sober sex experience was kind and loving and patient. And we only dated for a few months, and it was an amicable split, but like I look back on that, it was a really beautiful relationship because I advocated for myself and he respected me.
Yeah.
which was a novel idea.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Right?
Yeah. So
Completely.
it's really, really important that you figure out, ask yourself, what do you want out of a sexual experience? What does sex even mean to you? What does pleasure mean to you? What do you like? What do you not like? What do you do in the bedroom that you actually don't like doing, but your partner wants you to do? And again, all of these answers are going to be different for everyone. So for me, it was really figuring out what I wanted out of a sexual relationship, what I want out of a romantic relationship, and advocating for that, which sounds way easier because now there's some distance and I'm married, and but the work doesn't end when you get married either. It's we as humans continue to evolve. What I'm interested in sexually evolves. And I think it's like you said earlier, it's just important to remain open. remain flexible, communicate, talking. These sound really like really simple things, but we were not taught how to set boundaries. We women were not taught how to say no, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So it's really, it's a lot of work to
Yeah.
get.
I was thinking that it is, you were saying there's like a little guide in your book, which I think is, it feels to me that with any transition, these would be really good building blocks. So whether it's stopping, if you go sober, if you've had a child, so if you're a new mum, or if you're going through the menopause, right? And you break it down to reconnect the senses, embrace more intense sensations, it's all that pleasure bit, and then go from sensual to sexual. It's like you don't just go from 0 to
Mm-hmm.
100. And I feel like when, that whole thing about we're all recovering from something, the She Recovers motto. And it's like
Yeah.
life is impactful. When we are impacted, I feel like as a woman, as a female, as a sexual person, at every single transition point, not only just getting sober, I have had to really kind of go, oh, I don't know. I might need to let this settle. I might need to go back a step. I'm not really sure. I might need more time, and but it's so, like we were saying before, it's like the taboo thing that we don't talk about and give ourselves that grace and that permission,
Yeah.
especially if we've got attachment issues, especially if there's trauma, especially if there's all these different layers, right?
If there's
So
people
it's
pleasing,
big. Yeah.
codependency, there's all this stuff that again comes up.
Mm.
I recently I did a talk at Mindful Drinking Fest, and I talked about, I said the sentence like, I realized that I drank to manage my interpersonal relationships. And someone came up to me, there was a book signing after, this woman came up to me and she goes, that that is why I drink.
Mm.
Thank you for naming that. I didn't
Yeah.
realize I don't know how to have interpersonal relationships. I don't know how to be a friend. I don't know how to be a daughter. I don't know how to date. And it, again, giving people this language really gives people freedom,
Mm.
because once you can identify why you keep relying on this thing, in this case alcohol, um your life can get better, but you have to have that awareness and you have to do some work to really figure out why you are self-destructing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a key point you said, that sort of the nub of it, the drinking to manage those interpersonal relationships, is, I think, what I would hazard a guess at most of us, actually, women, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because we are wired to connect with social animals, we're pro-social beings, and we've been taught the cultural messages are very much around alcohol, that you use it to connect with people. You use it to connect, to celebrate, to commiserate, all of that. And I always feel like if you flip that, it's really sinister, because actually what it's saying, what the narrative underneath is saying, you can't do this without me. So
Yeah,
how
that's a
many of
really good
us
point.
are carrying around this fear that we cannot connect without alcohol?
Mm-hmm. And it's like, and on a really basic, like physiological level, like excess alcohol use can cause erectile dysfunction. It
Yeah.
can cause vaginal dryness. It dries your mouth out. Those three things are like pretty important parts of a
Yeah.
sexual experience. So, we're talking about like this really heady emotional stuff, but when you break it down physically, it's like, I always thought drunk sex was better. And then I realized it's actually not. Um, because you like Brene Brown says, you cannot selectively numb your emotions. If you're drinking to numb your anxiety, your body is also being numbed. So you're not experiencing maximum pleasure. So for a lot of people, having sex without alcohol for the first time is like, holy shit. Like I've never felt that
Yeah.
before, and that could be overwhelming, which is again why like the breakdown that you just read, it I want you to ease into it, because especially if there's sexual trauma, you've got to take it slow, because there's so much newness that comes up.
Yeah. And we're not used to, and this goes to the heart of often why I think we use alcohol, why alcohol is almost such a successful drug. It's because it's a quick fix, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're not. If I think if there's one thing that we're, the sort of the poverty that we have at the moment is, I mean, there are a few, but time poverty, the sense of not enough, not enough, not enough, not enough
Yeah.
is so prevalent. I feel like, especially, I don't know whether it's a female narrative. I haven't sort of talked to many men about it, but I know the women with all the heavy lifting of everything, it's like, I can't afford the time as another insidious cultural message underlying everything. And it's like, I'm not going to just put the dishes down. Finish mopping the floor, and then suddenly, bam, I'm 100% ready to go in the bedroom. That's
Mm-hmm.
never going to fucking happen. I'm sorry. It's not going to freaking happen.
No.
I need a little bit of the stage to be set. I need to come out of my fight flight response. I need to come out of activation. I need to go into that ventral vagal, whatever, like that. Sort of
Yeah.
receptivity. And that will take time, and it takes a little bit of a process. And when
It
you're
really does.
parents, right, you don't have that time.
You got to schedule. We don't have kids, and we have to schedule it. We have to
Right.
schedule, because like we're both so busy. There's just a lot going on. And it's also, there's something to be said for setting, like you said, setting the scene, like light some candles, dim the lights,
Yeah.
play some music. Like you said, if you're going from like doing dishes and like putting the kids down, then it's like you need some sort of transition. You need like, there's got to be something. There's got to be something
Yeah.
there, because then you go into the bedroom and then it's like, oh God, now I have to perform.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way, which is why I say, what do you want out of a sexual experience? What does your partner want out of a sexual experience? Sometimes like my partner and I, we like to say like scheduling intimacy,
Yeah.
because that takes the pressure off of the actual like
I
sex.
like that.
It's like sometimes it just means like we're gonna like lay in a candlelit room and just like snuggle and talk about our day. And
Yeah.
that's all that we need at the
Yeah.
time. Maybe something else will come from that, but who knows? Like it
Yeah.
really is like just scheduling time to be with each other one on one. Don't even
Mm.
say the sex word, you know, don't
Yeah.
even worry about that, because it really is just about connection, and physical connection is just, there's so many other ways to express it.
Yeah, I love what you said there. And it's reminded me of I think you said something about create new rituals of connection. That
Yeah,
sort
yes,
of,
it's
what
just
else? What else?
scheduling intimacy time. Because we talked about, you quit drinking while you were in a relationship, and alcohol was part of your relationship. Really figuring out like, okay, what we're going to stay together. We're going to, I'm just not going to drink. So what role did alcohol play? Did you like sharing a bottle of wine? Because that can easily be replicated.
Yeah.
There's NA wines. You can make a pot of tea. There is something to be said for like, a big part of sharing a bottle of wine is about ritual. It's
Yeah.
about experience. It's about mindfully like smelling the flavor notes and pairing it with a meal. Like, is that what you liked doing? You could do that with tea. You could
Yeah.
do that with something else. But and so, maybe it's going to a workout together. Maybe you need to get out of the house, go to a yoga class, go to a boxing class, go do something together. You get home and then you shower, and then, you know, who knows what could happen from there.
Mm.
But it's like the whole sharing a bottle of wine is like alcohol is actually such a tiny, tiny part of that ritual.
Yeah.
It's a shared experience. It's a shared sensory experience. So what other senses can you indulge in?
Yeah.
Maybe you're playing around with different textures and like rubbing feathers or a pinwheel on your arm and like trying that out on each other. I would just say placing the emphasis more on um what you both want out of the experience, because alcohol is such a small part.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think it's so wise. It's funny, isn't it? When you say it and when you break it down, it's like, yeah, that's common sense. Yeah, I can see that. But I think we're the subject, like you were saying before, it's almost like it's become so heavy, so sort of laden with expectation and worry for people.
Mm-hmm.
Because am I good enough? It's that am I good enough? Well, for women, I think, am I good enough? Am I hot enough? Am I, there's all of that narrative that can go on. Um, and the boundaries for advocating for what you want. And I genuinely think I love that bit about the true courage and why you start the book with that dating yourself, with that getting to know yourself piece, and why that's the foundation. Because then we've got half a chance of like going, oh, okay, I might be ready to have a think about this now. I might be
Yeah.
ready to have that conversation now. And
Yeah, there's this like a big part of my unlearning
mm,
of the problematic relationship with sex that I had was like, reading women's magazines growing up,
mm,
and like, if I don't have sex 3 times a week, then my husband's going to cheat on me. Or, it's just like,
mm,
there's so much that I internalized,
yeah,
and it put so much sexual pressure.
yeah,
I put so much sexual pressure on myself.
mm,
So, it's even like being conscious of what am I reading? Am I reading books and magazines and literature that make me feel empowered sexually, or am I reading things that make me feel inadequate
yeah.
sexually? Don't do the latter.
No,
Read read the things that make you feel empowered, that remind you that you have control of yourself as a sexual person. If you're, it's kind of like I unfollowed anyone on Instagram who posted like bikini pictures because I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
this doesn't make me
No,
feel good about myself. So
no.
it's like it's that lens, like
Mm,
filling your cup with things that make you feel good can help you feel more sexual.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, what would be your kind of the sort of top tips to recap for people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say remembering why you gave up alcohol or you got sober curious is like, I would hold on to that. I would really, really hold on to that in your heart. Like, maybe you write it down, maybe you make it the wallpaper on your phone, maybe you hang it up above your desk. Remind yourself why you're not drinking right now. Because that's where your confidence comes from.
Mm,
You taking a stand for yourself,
yeah,
for your mental health, for your sanity, for your physical health. That's where you're going to feel more confident in the bedroom. Yeah, that like you're taking a
yeah,
stand for yourself, and that's fucking cool.
yeah.
You
It's a
know, like
foundational boundary, right? It's the
it
foundational.
really
Mm,
is. And like that is a filter that you need to put everything else through.
yeah,
If anyone compromises you standing up for yourself, get out. Don't go on a second date with them. If someone's trying to push you to do something you don't feel comfortable doing, that's not a good friend, that's not a good family member, that's not a good date.
mm,
So really figure out your why and carry that with in your heart, I think is the most important thing, because you're not going to need liquid courage if you can remember that.
yeah. I love that. That is so foundational, isn't it? And
Mhm.
I remember you just reminded me that this kind of this courage and this self-esteem, this fundamental act of self-love, which is written on my sober app. Why
Mm.
am I sober? But you just reminded me when I was in my early 20s and I went through a particularly bad breakup, and I went to see a hypnotherapist. I was actually decided I was going to stop smoking. And I went to see a hypnotherapist, this old lady, and I felt that I didn't have much female guidance at the time.
Mm.
And she was amazing. And she talked to me about it, and we did this hypnotherapy. And she said, I can't remember what she said. She said, I know that you're hurting right now, but you're in your bloom. Yeah, you're blooming. And
Mm.
any man would be lucky to spend 5 minutes in your company, let alone go on a date with you. And I was like, okay,
Yes.
we all need her in our pocket going. I was
Oh,
like,
that
you
is
take
so
that, Grandma.
beautiful.
Yeah, and how many of us don't remember that actually that beautiful sense of self-worth that actually, yeah, just to have that company and to have that value, yeah, in
Hmm.
ourselves. And that's not to say, oh yeah, I'm like some kind of diva and I'm this and I'm that and you're lucky, but it's like
No,
that's a
that
real precious feeling, like I am precious. I am
well, and
precious.
I'm glad that you said that because that's the unfortunate thing that women are often taught is like if you stand up for yourself, then you're being a bitch, you're being a diva,
Mm.
because we're so used to being people pleasers that when you actually say no to something, it's like, who are you? Where have you
Yeah.
been this whole time? So it's, there is this element of like, you do have to own the fact that you've
Mm.
been a people pleaser in the past. And that was for me. I still struggle with it today. I'm definitely better at boundaries. Um, but my codependency and my people pleasing tendencies are still there. And, you have to honor and love and nurture the past you who
Yeah.
brought you to where you are.
Oh, a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much for talking to me today. And we always have, we talked about rituals, and we have a ritual on the Love Sober podcast, which is to just ask you your reason to love sober today.
Mm. My reason to love sober. Does that like, why do I love
Being
being
sober.
sober or why do I love being sober? Um, it really is it's like I wouldn't have what I have if I was still drinking until I blacked out. I wouldn't be a published author. I wouldn't have the healthiest romantic relationship of my life with my husband. I wouldn't live in New York City. I wouldn't, it really giving up alcohol completely changed my life for the better. And it's not to say it's all rainbows and sunshine because it's not. Um, but it really is it's like so corny, but like not drinking alcohol really is a gift that I give myself every day.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much, Tawny. And I'll obviously put everything in the show notes below how you can find you, find your book, find your alcohol-free drinks, everything that you're up to. We'll list below. But it's been an absolute joy, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was so great. You're a lovely host.
Thanks.